Hello and welcome to the Meathead Marksman channel. My name is Uncle Hodge and today I am going to be your guide through the weird and wacky world of Australian gun laws. And because I know you're busy, we're going to start with a few lightning round questions to summarise to get all the important parts of the video done at the start, and then we are going to wander off into the weeds and discuss some of the weirdnesses that come with trying to control people with laws who want to own guns. So stay tuned for that if you can, but let's kick it off with all the important points first and go from there. Question number 1, why should you listen to me about anything? I'm an Aussie, as you can probably tell by my accent, and I own guns. These are all legally owned. I don't have any illegal guns or anything like that. It's shooting is pretty much the sport that I enjoy the most, so everything I have is all above board. And on top of that, I have spent some time in the military, so I've got a wide-ranging level of experience with a lot of different firearms, and in particular, the firearms that most people will never ever get their hands on. So my level of experience and understanding with different action types, the way firearms work, is quite high, and because shooting is what I enjoy, it's my hobby, I've had to navigate the strange web of laws that we have in place in Australia, which regulates the way that we can own firearms. So I have a good level of experience, and I think I'm coming from a pretty solid place to talk about this subject. Question number 2, what happened? Why do we have gun control in Australia? In 1996, the Port Arthur Massacre happened, where Martin Bryant killed 35 people and then injured over 20 more. And although this wasn't the only massacre in Australia's history, there's been lots of different massacres, and they weren't all done with firearms. They were done by arson or any great number of other things like vehicle attacks or bombings. But basically, the Port Arthur Massacre was the catalyst for change within the Australian Parliament. After 1996, there was bipartisan support for the new National Firearms Agreement that was put forward by the Australian Liberal Party. And strangely enough to overseas folk, the Liberal Party in Australia is actually the more conservative party. But regardless of that, it had bipartisan support, so both wings of politics were voting this legislation through. Basically, it broke weapons down into categories and only allowed certain people to own certain categories of weapons. These weapons are all given a letter classification, A being the easiest to get, B being slightly harder, and then the categories cascade from there all the way down to things like category R, which are restricted weapons. Basically only security forces like police and military can own stuff like that. So that's what happened. We had a massacre, and then the National Firearms Agreement was brought in by both sides of politics in 1996. And then in order to get the guns out of the hands of the average person, the Parliament instigated a gun buyback scheme where they used taxpayer money to buy back all of the firearms that you were no longer allowed to have. Now, after that happened, there has been since then a few amnesties where you can bring a firearm that you're not allowed to own into either a gun shop or the police station and surrender it and have no charges laid against you during that amnesty period. And a lot of weapons still get handed back today through those amnesties. Question number 3. Did it work? Did the laws actually do anything positive? If we have a look at the list of massacres in Wikipedia that have happened in Australia, the history of large-scale killings of lots of people goes all the way back to the 1600s when the first Dutch shipwreck happened and a breakaway group of survivors killed 110 people. And then you follow through and you can see there are many, many massacres of Indigenous folks by white settlers, and then retaliation killings going all the way up until October 1928. And then from there you'll see there have been a number of arson attacks, a number of mass shootings, and several vehicle attacks. Even a few stabbing rampages. So anyone who thinks that gun control is a good way to stop massacres, I think you might be mistaken, because although the Port Arthur Massacre was the last sort of large-scale mass shooting massacre, there have been several massacres since then. The only difference now is that people are using arson or they're using vehicle attacks, or they're going on stabbing rampages. So the scale is smaller though, so that's a good thing. It appears to have reduced the overall death toll of mass shootings, but we still have mass shootings and we still have large-scale massacres that happen either via vehicle attack or arson or stabbing. So it hasn't stopped massacres, but it seems to have taken the overall death toll of shooting-related massacres down, but definitely hasn't stopped mass killings in Australia at all. Some people like to quote statistics that suicide rates via firearm have gone down, and also that firearm-related homicides have gone down as well. But if you look at the statistics from further back than 1996, you'll see that those rates were dropping as time goes by, and the suicide by firearm rate may be declining, but at the same rate that that's declining, the suicide by hanging is climbing. So it hasn't really stopped anyone from killing themselves, unfortunately, but that's just the nature of mental illness, I suppose. Alright, so question number 4. Can you still have guns in Australia? Yes. Yes, you can. It's just you have to have a license, and to get that license, you have to fulfill a certain amount of requirements. So you have to have a reason for owning your firearms, you have to have a safe storage place, and you have to fulfill the other requirements that the police checks require you to complete. So you have to have basically no criminal charges and all that sort of stuff. You can find out about that on this website here, Queensland Government website. This is a good one. It will take you through the process of applying for a weapons license, tell you about the different types of licenses, and describe the categories of weapons that you are allowed to own and who is allowed to own them. So basically, the quick answer to that question is your average shooter who shoots because they hunt or because they are a sportsman. Perhaps they compete in their local gun club or whatever, or they just shoot targets recreationally. Generally, those people are allowed to own, if their license provides it. Those are valid reasons for owning manually operated firearms like bolt-action rifles, lever-action rifles, and stuff like that. No semi-automatics. They are a higher class of firearm, so you have to have different reasons for owning them. But basically, the guns that you saw behind me before, they are all A and B firearms. So we'll take a deeper look at them in the second half of the video. Alright, question number 5. What do I, as a gun owner, think about these gun laws? I don't think they're entirely a bad thing. I think as far as we stand in Australia, we don't have a Second Amendment. We don't have a right to own firearms as described in a constitutional document. But I think it is a good idea that there are safe storage requirements. That's my safe back there, the big old girl, bolted into the floor, meets all of the relevant standards. It weighs 165 kilos, so it's very heavy, it's very difficult to move. And I think it's a good thing that you should have to be mentally fit to own firearms. I think you should have to store them safely, and I think it's a good idea that we have safety courses that you have to complete in order to get your license. I think those are all good things, but the cons of firearms licensing, it seems that the way firearms are classified is just pulled out of the air by people who have no idea what they're talking about. There are certain strangenesses within the rules, like you can have a pump-action rifle, but you can't have a pump-action shotgun if you are a shooter, like I mentioned before. If you are a sporting shooter or a hunter and you only have a category A and B license, like most shooters in Australia do, you can have a pump-action rifle, but you can't have a pump-action shotgun, which is just silly. There's no, I don't know, it just doesn't make any sense. And in some states, classifications are different. So in Queensland, you can have a pump-action rifle, but you can't have a pump-action shotgun. And in some other states, you can't even have a pump-action rifle. So it really doesn't make any sense the way that these things are classified. There are appearance clauses. So if the state authority deems that your firearm looks too much like a military grade firearm, they can put restrictions on it. They can reclassify it to classification D or R even, which makes no sense because it doesn't change the operation of the firearm, it just changes the appearance of the firearm. And what is a military appearance for a firearm? Is a Lee Enfield number 4? That's a military firearm. No one seems to be scared of that because it's not black. It's made from lovely timber furniture and nice bluing, very, very good looking gun, but nonetheless, it is a military firearm, but it isn't treated like one by the authorities, which is silly to me as well. Basically, the cons are the people that make the rules and classify the firearms don't know what they're doing, so you kind of have to just grin and bear it and take what you can get and enjoy using bolt action guns and pump action rimfires and navigate your way through the weirdness that is gun laws that have been planned by people who don't know anything about guns. That pretty much concludes our quick answer to the big questions. So now what we're going to do is talk about who can own what and how that relates to the different types of licenses. So as you can see on the Queensland Government website about gun licenses, it has a list of different firearm license types. So there's your firearms license, which is the most commonly used general license by farmers and sporting and target shooters. That's what I have. I have an A and B license. You have minors licenses, so people who are between the ages of 11 and 17 are able to get a license, but there are certain conditions with that. They've got to be supervised. Basically allows the use of firearms by a minor under supervision. Visitor's license for people visiting the state from a different state who have a gun license in that other state. An armourer's license. So an armourer is a person who fixes guns or modifies them for whatever reason. Further to that, we have a dealer's license, which is required if you run a business for buying or selling firearms. And a firearms instructor license, pretty self-explanatory on that one. Group licenses, blank firearms, theatrical ordnance for making movies. Collector's licenses, if you have permanently disabled weapons that you collect, or other weapons that are valuable and you collect them for investment purposes, or you're just an enthusiastic collector, you can get a collector's license. There are different requirements for large collections of firearms. You have to have different safe storage, like my safe back there wouldn't be enough. You have to have alarms and there's a bunch of other stuff that you have to have, but that doesn't pertain to most people, so we won't go too far into that. Miscellaneous weapons required for the use of body armour, crossbows and the possession of some knives. It's not a common thing to own body armour in Australia, so it doesn't seem to bother anyone that is you require a miscellaneous weapons licence to own that. Something that is coming to the fore more now in the hunting community is the crossbow licence, which is category M in Queensland. Just with the rise in technology of those hunting bows, it seems to be more and more popular as days go by. A concealable firearms license, specifically for handguns, security guard license, and security organisation licenses. With handguns, generally in Australia, there's no concealed carry for the general population. If you have a firearm in public, it must be kept out of the view of public. So our concealable firearms license for a sporting handgun shooter, or anyone basically who isn't a security officer of some sort, be that military, police, private security, you're not going to be concealed carrying a firearm for self-defense purposes, basically. You have the concealable firearms license, which allows you to own the concealable firearm, and then you take it to the range and you shoot competitions with it. It's not something that you use to defend yourself. So, let's go into the categories of weapons. We'll start off with category A and B, which is what I have. This is the most common license that most people will get when they get into shooting as a hobby. So category A, rimfire rifles, single or double barrel shotguns, paintball guns, air rifles, and powerheads. A powerhead is a specialised weapon that you use underwater when you're spearfishing or whatever. If a shark comes up, you go boop and bop him on the head, and it basically fires something like a shotgun shell at very close range into whatever it is that's trying to bite you. So you need a license for that. That'll be a category A license. The category A restrictions are for manually operated firearms. So just because it says you can have rimfire rifles doesn't mean you can have something like a Ruger 10-22 where it's semi-automatic. So for every pull of the trigger it fires one round and you don't have to work the action back manually to put the next round in. You can't have that on a Class A license. So that would fall under a Class C license, which is generally only held by people who are primary producers, so farmers or pest controllers, that sort of thing. So it's manually operated rimfire rifles, single or double barrel shotguns, paintball guns, air rifles, and powerheads. There are some strange anomalies within Category A. You can have a rifle-sized revolver. So if your firearm works on a revolving action, like the Crosman 1022, every time you pull the trigger, the weight of the trigger pull spins the magazine around and puts the next round in the chamber, and off you go. It's very similar to a semi-automatic rifle. However, the action of pulling the trigger rotates the magazine and puts a new round in. And for some reason, that's fine, but semi-automatic rifles are not. The rifles like that are the Crosman 1077, and there's a few different Rossi revolver type rifles. So that will pretty much bring us down for Category A. Category B. Category B rifles are centerfire rifles other than semi-automatic centerfire rifles, and also combination guns like a 12 gauge barrel on the bottom with a 22 barrel on the top, for instance. That would also be a Category B. Category B centerfire rifles are, like, this is one of the strange things about Australian gun laws. You can have a lever action shotgun with a Category B license, but you can't have a pump action shotgun, which just seems a bit silly to me. And you can also have pump action rifles, but not pump action shotguns again. So not really sure why that is, but it is. Category B is another one of the categories that most people have. So most people in Australia who shoot have access to Category A and B. So they have access to manually operated rimfire rifles, single or double barrel shotguns, paintball guns, air rifles, power heads, and centerfire rifles and combination guns. That's basically about what your average person in Australia can have if they are interested in shooting. So let's talk about Category C. Category C isn't something that the average Aussie has. It's generally reserved for primary producers, so people who have a farm with a pest problem. Maybe you have a macadamia farm and there's just pigs that come in all the time and they eat all the things off the ground and dig up the ground, and that's a big problem for you. And you need to dispatch all of those pigs at once. So you have a reason to have a Category C firearm, which are semi-automatic or pump-action shotguns and semi-automatic rimfires. And there are capacity limits. So for a semi-automatic or pump-action shotgun, they have to be holding 5 rounds or less. And for the rimfires, for those semi-automatic rimfires on Category C, they must be capable of holding 10 rounds or less. So small magazines, but allow you to do a lot more work quicker, basically. But the average person in Australia who shoots or hunts, shoots targets or hunts recreationally isn't going to have a Category C license. Category D. Now, Category D firearms are semi-automatic centerfires, semi-automatic shotguns capable of holding more than the aforementioned 5 rounds in the magazine, and semi-automatic rimfires capable of holding more than 10 rounds. To get a Category D license, it basically has to be your full-time job as a pest controller, and even then you still have to prove that you need it for the type of pest control that you do. So it's fairly heavily restricted to get a Category D license, and the firearms that you would be using tend to be very expensive in Australia as well, because there's not much demand for them. So basically when the dealers import them, they sit on the shelf for a long time until someone with a Category D license, the 1 in a million people who has a Category D license, comes in and buys that specific gun because they need it for that specific purpose. So something like an AR-15 in Australia is thousands of dollars. So it's generally not something that you see. But people who do things like wild dog and cat pest control, where you might have a pack of dogs that's moving really quickly and you need to take them out because they're eating a farmer's sheep or something like that, they are going to have, obviously that's their full-time job to hunt down pests and stuff like that, and they need to dispatch lots of animals quickly. Basically that's how they're going to get their Category D firearms license. And to get it, you do have to provide a whole bunch of information. You have to be able to prove basically that it's your full-time income. And yeah, it's not something that the average Aussie will ever get. Category E. Category E weapons are bulletproof vests. It seems weird to classify that as a weapon, but if you're going to classify lever action shotguns as a different classification to pump action shotguns, why not? Coffee's probably a weapon as well. Anyway, to get a bulletproof vest, the chances are you just won't get one. You have to be a security operator, so police, military, or private security, and even then it's the storage requirements are going to need you to store it at that place of work generally. So we won't go too much into that. We'll skip on to category H weapons, which are handguns. The process for getting a handgun license is a little bit different, and the requirements are different as well. So where with an A and B license, there's no requirement to prove that you attend a range. You can just be a financial member of a gun club and go once a year, and there's even no checks on that, because the other reasons for owning A and B firearms are for like recreational target shooting and stuff like that, where there's no attendance record basically. But with handguns in Queensland, at least, you have to attend a certain number of shoots every year, and the process for applying and purchasing them is a little bit different as well. I don't have a handgun license, so I can't really comment precisely on that, but as far as I understand, you have to be a member of a pistol club, and you have to attend that pistol club a certain amount of times for every handgun that you have. And if you fail to meet those attendance requirements, they can take the license off you, and you have to surrender your gear and sell it or whatever you're going to do. Category R for restricted or Rambo. Pick one. Machine guns, fully automatic, large caliber military weapons. So category R is not something that anyone in Australia really gets to use other than the military and some police. It would be a bit of a stretch to think that a private security organisation would have category R weapons. That sort of stuff just doesn't really need to exist in this country at the moment, aside from in the hands of military and law enforcement, in my humble opinion. I don't think there's a requirement for private security contractors to be wandering around with Mag 58s and M4s and stuff like that. Maybe there is, maybe I'm wrong, but generally our police and our special forces do a pretty good job of handling all that sort of stuff. So we'll leave that one where it is. Right, so to summarise, the categories of weapons are category A, B, C, D, E, H, M and R. The average Australian shooter who shoots for recreational target shooting or hunting is going to have a category A and B, possibly an M if they want to shoot a crossbow, and other sporting shooters may have category H if their jam is handguns, competitive shooting of handguns, not concealed carry, and basically categories C, D, E and R are going to be, the requirements are different. You must have those licenses for specific purposes like private security and military and law enforcement type dealios. So let's talk about who can have a license in Australia. You must be over the age of 18. You must have completed the appropriate safety course, and you must have safe storage for your guns. You must have a legitimate reason for owning the gun, like being a member of a gun club or being a firearms collector. You must also be a fit and proper person. This is a legal term, and it takes into account your criminal record and potential health issues. If you are younger than the age of 18, if you are aged between 11 and 17, you can apply for a miner's license. That doesn't allow you to own firearms per se, but it does allow you to use them under supervision. To elaborate on those conditions, if you are over the age of 18, you must do your safety course. So to do that, you're going to contact your local shooting range, gun club, and see when they are next hosting their safety courses. They will take you through a theory component, and then they will take you through the practical component. So basically, during the theory, they will teach you about the gun, how to use it safely on paper, and then you will go over and do the practical assessment where you fire X amount of rounds down range under supervision. Do that safely, and then they will give you a certificate once you've paid the fee, and off you go. You can add that to your license application to say that you have fulfilled your requirement to complete the appropriate safety course. Secondly, safe storage for your firearms. You need to get a safe. There are some strange laws that allow you to use wooden cabinets that meet certain requirements and certain thicknesses. I would stay well away from that. Just get a gun safe, bolt it into the ground. That way, when the police come to inspect it, because they will, you can say, hey, look, this is where it, unlock it, show them where it's bolted in, and lock her up again, all good, minty. No weirdnesses, no grey areas there. Get a gun safe, bolt it in, call it good. Those safe storage requirements change if you're applying for a higher class of license, but if you are, you probably shouldn't be watching this. You should already know. You should figure it out yourself. So for A and B shooters, get a gun safe, bolt it in. When it gets inspected, you won't have any dramas. You take a photo of it or include the receipt in your application for a license, and then that will fulfill your requirement for safe storage. You must have a legitimate reason for owning the gun. Legitimate reasons include being a member of a gun club, hunting, pest control, that sort of thing, and also being a collector. And you may have to provide proof of that. So you will basically get your membership certificate or a receipt that says that you have become a member of a gun club, and then you're all good. Or in the case of being that you are hunting, you must have either proof that you own a property large enough to safely use the firearms that you want to use, or you must have written permission from the owner of a property who is allowing you to hunt on their property, which is sizable enough to safely use the firearm type that you want to use. And you would include that paperwork on your application. You must also be a fit and proper person. The requirements for that may change slightly state to state in Australia, but basically it's going to be a police check that looks into your criminal history and also your mental health. And you don't really have to provide anything for that. The police will do that as part of your processing of your license application. Alrighty then. So to summarize, you must be over the age of 18. You've got to go and do your safety course and include that paperwork on your application. You must have evidence of your self-storage, and you must have a legitimate reason for owning your firearm. So you've got to have written permission to hunt on someone's land or be a member of a gun club, and you must also be a fit and proper person, but the police will take care of that. So once you have fulfilled all of those requirements and you have all of that documentation, you can either go into your local police station and apply there, or you can do it online. I highly recommend that you do it online. That wasn't an option when I got my gun license because it was a while ago. I had to go into the police station, and it was a bit of a frustrating process because the blokes behind the counter didn't really understand what I was trying to do. They were skeptical of a whole bunch of stuff, and it was very frustrating. It's not to throw shade on them because they might be from different walks of life, and that's not something they deal with every day. It's just frustrating. So if you can apply online, and you can jump over that knowledge gap and go straight to the firearms department and weapons licensing. And those guys are a little bit more on the ball with that particular type of police work, and they'll handle your application a lot quicker than your local police department. So that basically covers the process for applying for a firearms license. Once you've done that and you've got your application together, to get an actual firearm, there is another piece of paperwork you have to do called a permit to acquire. So you can apply for a permit to acquire a firearm when you submit your application for a license, and then basically there's a waiting period of 28 days, like a cooling off period, if you will, for your first permit to acquire, and then that can be submitted. So like as soon as your license is approved, then your 28-day waiting period starts. So that sort of streamlines that process a little bit. But applying for a permit to acquire is a fairly simple thing. You can do it online as well. You don't have to go into the police station to do that. You just basically fill out the form on the web, tell them what you want to buy, and then they will basically approve or knock it back depending on whether or not you can legally own it. And they're not overly restrictive in my state. I've got 2 different 22s. I have 3 air rifles in my safe at the moment. They're not super fussed about me having more than one of the same caliber or anything like that. But once you get to a certain amount of firearms, your storage requirements change. So they may require you to prove that you have met those new storage requirements, or they might come out for an inspection or something like that. You just basically apply for it, pay the fee, and then submit it online. And then usually within a week or 2, you'll get an email back saying that it is approved, and then the actual certificate itself will come in the mail, and you can either have them send that to you or to the dealer that you are buying your firearm from, which streamlines that process a little bit as well. That's a good idea, I think. So to bring it in for a landing, fulfill the requirements, put your application in, and submit your first permit to acquire with your application so that your 28-day waiting period begins as soon as your license becomes valid, and then send it all away online wherever possible. Keep your gear safely stored and learn these regulations like the back of your hand. If I didn't know if I didn't take the time to learn all of this through and through before I applied for my license, it would have been a complete nightmare. It would have been knocked back and it would have been changed and it would have taken forever. So the onus is on you to read through all of the material. I'll include a bunch of links in the description. Make sure that you absorb all of that. And if you have any questions, drop them down in the comments and I'll get back to you. But yeah, basically in Australia, you're going to have category A, B, M, and H for the general public, and you will only have access to those if you fulfill the requirements that we mentioned before. So jump on the net, read through all the material, links in the description, ask questions, talk about it, learn the laws, and yeah, I hope that this helps you, and I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers.